The alarm never actually woke Daniel Mercer. He was already up, had been since 5:15, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold beside him, running through the day's variables the way he used to run through code, methodically, quietly, alone. Lily's lunch needed making. The car needed gas. There was a report due Friday that he hadn't started and probably wouldn't start until Thursday night, which was fine. He worked well under pressure. He'd learned that about himself a long time ago, back when pressure meant something different than it did now. Now pressure meant keeping a 10-year-old's world intact. He got up and put 2 slices of bread in the toaster. Through the kitchen window, Birchwood Lane was still gray, the streetlights making halos in the October fog. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel slightly underwater, soft and muted, and not quite real. Daniel liked mornings like this. They gave him 30 minutes to exist without anyone needing anything from him. He heard the creak on the 7th stair, always the 7th, no matter how many times she tried to skip it. Morning, bug. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, her hair not quite brushed. She was small for her age, fine-boned like her mother had been, with dark circles under gray eyes that made her look perpetually thoughtful, or maybe just tired. Probably both. "You didn't wake me," she said. "You woke yourself." She sat down at the table and pulled her backpack onto her lap like a shield. This was a thing she did. Held things close to her chest, literally. Books, bags, sweaters. Daniel had asked her about it once, gently, the way you approached everything with Lily. She'd shrugged and said she didn't know. He believed her. There was a lot Lily didn't know about herself yet. He put the toast in front of her. She pulled the crusts off without looking at them and set them in a neat line beside the plate. "Mrs. Calloway gave back the math tests yesterday," she said. Daniel sat down across from her. "How'd you do?" She didn't answer immediately. She picked up one of the crusts and turned it over in her fingers like she was checking it for flaws. "I got 100, she said. "And I got the bonus question right." He kept his face neutral. "The one on the board? The one at the bottom?" "The extra one." He nodded and took a sip of his cold coffee. The bonus question on Mrs. Calloway's 6th grade math tests was not 6th grade math. He knew this because he'd looked at the test packet at back-to-school night, flipping through it the way any interested parent would, and the bonus section at the end had made him pause and look again. It wasn't standard curriculum. It was a problem you'd find in a high school competition workbook, or maybe a university entrance exam for certain programs. He hadn't said anything at the time. He'd just put the packet down and moved on. "That's good," he said. Lily looked at him. "They're going to think something." "Who's they?" She put the crust back in its line. "People." He didn't push it. He knew what she meant. Lily had a finely calibrated sense of how other people perceived her, which she'd developed not from arrogance but from its opposite, from years of trying to take up exactly the right amount of space, no more, no less. She'd learned early that being too good at something made people uncomfortable. She'd learned it before she had words for it. "Did you eat all of that?" he asked, nodding at the toast. She had. He took her plate and put it in the sink, and they moved through the rest of the morning in their usual quiet way. Backpack checked. Shoes tied, the brief cold walk down the driveway to the bus stop, where Lily stood with her hood up and her bag held against her chest, and didn't talk to the other kids, who didn't talk to her either. He watched the bus pull away, and then stood there for a moment in the cold. "People," she'd said. He went inside and finished getting ready for work. The test came back on a Tuesday. There were 28 students in Mrs. Rachel Calloway's 6th grade mathematics class at Hargrove Elementary. The test, a unit assessment on fractions, ratios, and introductory algebraic thinking, was considered challenging by district standards. And Mrs. Calloway graded on that understanding. She didn't soften results or adjust curves. She believed students learned more from an honest score than a generous one. It was a philosophy she'd held for her entire career, and she stood by it. The district average for this particular assessment over the past 3 years was 67%. Mrs. Calloway was proud of that number. Actually, it meant the test was working as intended. separating students who understood the concepts from those who needed more support. Lily Mercer scored 100%. That alone would not have been remarkable. One perfect score, even on a hard test, was not unheard of. The remarkable thing was the bonus question. Mrs. Calloway had started including bonus problems 2 years ago at the suggestion of the district's enrichment coordinator, a way to stretch high-performing students, to give them something to reach for. In 2 years of including bonus questions, no student had ever answered one correctly. A few had tried. One boy last spring had gotten part way there. But complete, correct solutions were, in Mrs. Calloway's experience, not something sixth graders produced. Lily's solution was not only correct, it was elegant. Not the solution Mrs. Calloway had prepared in her answer key. Different, shorter, using a method she didn't recognize at first, a method that took her several minutes of work at her own desk after school to verify was actually valid. It was. And it was cleaner than hers. Mrs. Calloway sat with this for a long time. She was not a cruel woman. She did not think of herself as a suspicious woman, but she was a woman who had been teaching for 17 years. And in 17 years, she had learned that when something looked too good, it usually was. Children did not develop novel solution methods in isolation. Children did not consistently underperform on classwork and then produce perfect scores on assessments. And Lily Mercer, who was quiet and small and never raised her hand, who turned in homework that was competent but not spectacular, who gave every impression of being a perfectly ordinary 10-year-old Lily Mercer, had just handed in something that didn't belong to her. Or at least, that was the conclusion Mrs. Calloway reached somewhere between verifying the solution and walking to the copy room. She decided to confirm it the next day. The request came without warning. Mrs. Calloway was returning tests at the end of the period, walking the rows with the stack face down, placing each one in front of its owner. Lily watched her come. She always watched. She'd gotten good at reading rooms, the particular tension in a teacher's shoulders, the way they held their mouth when something was about to happen. She could feel what was coming, the way you could feel a drop in air pressure before a storm. She had felt it since she sat down that morning. She just hadn't known what shape it would take. Mrs. Calloway placed her test in front of her without a word. Then she said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Lily, I'd like you to come to the board and show us how you solved the bonus problem." The room shifted. 27 heads turned. Lily looked at the test in front of her. 100. Circled in red pen. The bonus question at the bottom had a small asterisk next to it, added in pencil. She looked at that asterisk for a moment. It was the kind of mark that meant something had been flagged, reconsidered. She understood what it meant. She stood up. The walk to the board felt longer than it was. She picked up a piece of chalk. They still used chalk at Hargrove, which was an old school in every sense, and faced the problem Mrs. Calloway had written. It was the same problem from the test, reproduced in large letters on the blackboard. Same numbers, same structure. She knew the answer. She could see the whole shape of it in her head, clean and ordered, the way it always looked when she worked through problems with her father at the kitchen table. She wrote, except she didn't write. Or, she started to write. And then the chalk stopped moving. The room was very quiet. She could feel all of it, the eyes, the waiting, the particular silence of 27 people watching someone who is supposed to fail. She thought, I know this. She thought, just write the first step. The first step was simple. She knew the first step. The first step was just identifying the structure of the problem, and she could see it clearly in her head. But the chalk didn't move. It wasn't that she didn't know. It was that she'd gone completely still. The knowing was there, fully formed, and it had locked up somewhere between her mind and her hand. Mrs. Calloway let the silence stretch for what felt like a very long time. Then she said, not unkindly, but clearly, "Take your time, Lily." She didn't move. A boy in the second row said something to the kid next to him, low, and they both laughed, a small, contained laugh, quickly stifled. Lily heard it. She heard everything. She heard the whisper, and the laugh, and the way the laugh was cut off, and she heard the careful silence of the 12 or 13 kids who didn't laugh, and she could not have said which was worse. She put the chalk down on the ledge of the board. She walked back to her seat. She sat down and folded the test into a small square and put it in the front pocket of her backpack. In the bottom of the pocket, pressed flat. Mrs. Calloway watched her do all of this and did not say anything else. After class, she wrote a note home. A formal note, on school letterhead, which meant it had been typed up in advance, composed before the class, before the board, before any of it. The conclusion had preceded the evidence. It requested that a parent or guardian attend a meeting the following Thursday at 3:15. It described the concern as academic integrity. It did not say the word cheating. But it didn't need to. They called it the hallway thing, Lily and some of the others. Not out loud, just in the way certain things accumulate meaning without being named. The hallway thing was when you walked from one class to another, and the corridor between them stopped being neutral space. When the distance between the water fountain and the classroom door, maybe 40 feet, started having texture, started having eyes. When you could tell without looking who had heard, and who had told, and who had already decided. It happened fast. By Wednesday, 3 days after the test was returned, the hallway thing was fully in effect. A girl named Claire, who had never been a close friend, but had been a reliable seat neighbor, the kind of proximity that becomes comfortable simply through repetition, moved her tray 2 seats down at lunch without explanation. She didn't look up when Lily sat down. She kept her eyes on her food with the studied casualness of someone who has made a decision and is working hard not to second-guess it. A boy named Preston, who liked to quiz people on math facts the way some kids like to quiz on sports statistics, stopped talking to Lily entirely. This was notable because Preston talked to everyone. He was indiscriminate about it, a conversational open door. The fact that he had quietly closed that door specifically for Lily was its own kind of statement. And in the hallway between English and social studies, on Thursday morning, Lily passed 2 girls whose conversations stopped mid-sentence as she approached. She heard the silence. She kept walking. She heard the conversation restart behind her at a volume that was calculated to carry. She didn't react to any of it. This was something Daniel had modeled for her, not deliberately, but through years of being himself in her presence. You don't give the room what it's waiting for. You keep your face still and your pace even, and you get to wherever you're going. Whatever you feel, you carry it quietly until you're somewhere safe enough to put it down. She ate lunch alone on Wednesday, and again on Thursday. She sat at the end of a long table near the windows, where the light came in gray and flat. She opened a book and read through both meals. This was a thing she'd done before. On purpose. Because she actually liked reading at lunch. The combination of food and words felt efficient to her, and the quiet of being absorbed was different from the quiet of being ignored. But this was different. Now the book was a tool. The quiet was necessary, not chosen. The difference between those two things felt enormous, even when they looked the same from the outside. She was aware, with each page she turned, of the specific shape of the awareness directed at her from the rest of the cafeteria. Not constant, not every second, but recurring, like someone turning a lamp on and off in the corner of her vision. On Thursday afternoon, she had math class. Mrs. Calloway handed back a different assignment, daily practice. Nothing remarkable, and when she placed it on Lily's desk, she said, quietly, without stopping, "Good work on this." The comment was ordinary. The delivery was slightly less ordinary, a slight softening in the teacher's voice. Something that might have been discomfort, or might have been reconsideration. Lily couldn't tell which. She filed it away. Thursday evening she came home, put her bag down, washed her hands, and started her homework at the kitchen table. She did this with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided that normal will be maintained through the performance of normal. That the scaffolding will hold if you keep using it. That routine is a form of insistence. Daniel came home at 6:15. He took off his jacket, poured himself a glass of water, and sat down across from her. She kept writing. He watched her for a moment. He noticed the way she was holding her pen too tightly. The knuckles slightly white, and the way she wasn't looking up. Wasn't acknowledging him the way she usually did, wasn't already asking about dinner or telling him something she'd read. She was working very hard at looking like she was working. "Lily." She looked up. "Show me the letter." She stared at him for 2 seconds. Then she got up, went to her bag, and brought back the folded note from the front pocket. She put it on the table between them and stood there with her hands at her sides. He read it slowly, all the way through. He turned it over, found nothing on the back, turned it face up again. He read the phrase academic integrity twice. The way you read something to make sure you're reading it correctly. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. I'll go. She sat back down. She uncapped her pen. She looked at her homework. Dad. Yeah. I froze at the board. I knew the answer. I just froze. He looked at her steadily. I know. They don't believe me. I know that too. She nodded once, very small, and went back to her homework. He went to the kitchen to start dinner. He didn't say anything else about it that night, and neither did she, and the quiet between them was the specific kind of quiet that is also a form of solidarity, the kind that says, I see it, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. After Lily was in bed, he sat back down at the table. He opened the note again. He read the phrase, academic integrity, one more time. He set the note aside. Then he opened her backpack and took out the test. He read it the way he used to read code, not for what it said, but for what it revealed about the mind that produced it. The work in the problems, the small notations in the margins, the progression of logic from step to step, the neat handwriting that she always applied to math, which was slightly different from her regular handwriting. More deliberate, as though she understood that in mathematics, legibility was a form of respect for the reader. He got to the bonus question at the bottom. The method she'd used wasn't standard. It wasn't something in any 6th grade textbook. It wasn't something you found in 7th or 8th grade either, probably. It was a compression technique, a way of collapsing several steps into one elegant move that only worked if you understood why it worked, not just that it worked. You couldn't copy it without understanding it, because without understanding it, you wouldn't even know what you were looking at. He had taught her that. He specifically remembered the evening, maybe 6 months ago, when she'd been working through a problem set from a competition workbook she'd found at the library. She'd checked it out herself, quietly, without telling him, which was something she did with things she was privately interested in, as if claiming them too loudly might make them disappear. The problem she'd been stuck on was similar in structure to the bonus question, and she'd come to him with it at the table, sitting down across from him the way she did, and said, I can't find the hinge. He'd liked that phrase, the hinge. He'd used it himself, once, years ago, talking to a graduate student who was stuck on a proof. He'd sat down beside her and said, here's a different way to think about it, and walked her through the compression. Slowly, making sure she understood each piece before moving to the next, watching her face, which did the inward thing it always did when she was following something carefully, until she looked up at him and said, oh, it's like folding it. And he'd laughed. A real laugh. Because that was exactly right, because that was a better description than the one in the textbook, and said, yes, exactly like folding it. She'd been 9 years old. He put the test down and sat with his hands flat on the table in the quiet kitchen. The lamp on the counter threw light across the maple surface. The window above the sink was dark with late October and the sound of the neighbor's dog carrying faintly through the glass. He was going to that meeting. The conference room at Hargrove Elementary smelled like old carpet and hand sanitizer. It was the room they used for parent-teacher conferences and the occasional disciplinary matter, a long table, chairs that didn't quite match, a whiteboard on one wall with some erased writing still faintly visible. There were blinds on the windows, which faced the parking lot. Someone had left them half open, and the afternoon light came in at a flat angle, catching the dust in the air above the table. When Daniel arrived, the room already held 4 people. Mrs. Calloway, who was sitting at the far end with a folder in front of her. A woman he didn't recognize, introduced as Miss Patricia Haynes, the assistant principal, and 2 parents, a man in a polo shirt and a woman in a fleece jacket who, it emerged, were the parents of Claire, the girl who'd moved her tray. They had heard about the situation from their daughter and had requested to attend. This struck Daniel as unusual and not entirely appropriate. He didn't say so, Not yet. He sat down. He was wearing the same thing he wore to work. Dark jeans, a plain button. Down, nothing impressive. He'd come straight from the office. He hadn't changed. He didn't think of this consciously, he was just thinking about the meeting. The room looked at him the way rooms did when you arrived alone. He registered the appraisal without reacting to it. The ordinary-looking man, no tie, no briefcase, nothing that suggested consequence. He'd learned to let people form their first impression completely, without interference. It was usually more useful that way. Miss Haynes spoke first, setting the tone. The school took academic integrity very seriously. These matters were handled carefully and confidentially. The purpose of today's meeting was to have a conversation, not to assign blame, but to understand what had happened and determine next steps. She spoke in the practiced, neutral register of administrators who have conducted these meetings many times. She was not cold, she was professional. There was a difference, and he noted it. Daniel nodded. He waited. Mrs. Calloway spoke for several minutes. She described the test, the score, the bonus problem. She described Lily's performance at the board not unkindly, but with the careful neutrality of someone who had already formed a conclusion and was now constructing a record of it. She noted that Lily's classroom performance had not previously suggested this level of ability. She used the word inconsistency several times. She mentioned that in her 17 years of teaching, she had learned to recognize when something didn't fit. Daniel listened to all of this without interrupting. He was paying attention not to the argument he'd anticipated the argument before he arrived, but to the texture of it, where the certainty lived, where the uncertainty was hiding behind professional language, where the room's weight was concentrated. The father in the polo shirt said, "Our daughter mentioned that a few of the other kids were also surprised by the score." Daniel looked at him. "Who is your daughter?" A brief pause. "Claire." "Okay." He looked back at Mrs. Calloway. "What evidence do you have that Lily cheated?" The question landed flatly, without inflection. Miss Haynes said, "Mr. Mercer, we're not here to—" "I understand," he said. "I'm asking a specific question. What evidence exists that Lily obtained this score through dishonest means?" A silence. Mrs. Calloway opened her folder. The inconsistency between her regular performance and this result. The difficulty of the bonus problem, which no other student in 2 years has solved correctly, and her inability to reproduce the work at the board. "She froze at the board," he said. "She's 10. With respect, she's a quiet child who was put in front of her entire class, without warning, and asked to perform under conditions that would make most adults falter." He kept his voice level. Not raised. Not soft. Level, the way you'd keep a compass needle level. That's not evidence of anything, except that public performance is hard. Silence. He continued. "You've described inconsistency. I'd like to ask whether anyone here has spoken with Lily about how she learns, how she studies, what she's interested in, whether anyone has asked her to explain her reasoning in a low-pressure setting, one-on-one, without 27 peers watching to see if she fails." He looked around the table, or whether the conclusion came first and the evidence is now being gathered to support it. The woman in the fleece jacket made a small sound and looked at the table. Miss Haynes said, "Mr. Mercer, we understand this is frustrating." "It's not frustrating," he said. "It's inaccurate. And I can demonstrate that it's inaccurate. If you're willing to let me." The room went quiet, in a particular way, the way rooms go quiet when someone has said something that changes the rules of the conversation. Not angry quiet. Not defensive quiet, the kind that happens when the frame shifts and everyone is recalibrating. Mrs. Calloway looked at him. Her professional neutrality had developed a small crack in it, not hostility, just uncertainty, a reconsideration. "What do you mean?" she said slowly. "When you say you can demonstrate it." "Give her a problem," he said. "Right now. Write something on a piece of paper. Something comparable to the bonus question. Something at that level or harder. Something you compose on the spot. So there's no possibility it was prepared for in advance. Let her work it in private. Without an audience. Without time pressure. Show me the result." A long pause. "If I'm wrong," he said, "then we'll have a different conversation. But if the result is what I expect it to be, then we'll have the conversation we should have been having from the beginning." He looked at Miss Haynes. "Which is, what does this school need to do differently for a child who has been sitting in the wrong room this entire year?" They brought Lily from her classroom at 4 o'clock. She appeared in the doorway of the conference room, still in her sweatshirt, her backpack over both shoulders, looking at her father with the careful, unreadable expression she'd been wearing all week. He looked back at her and gave her one small nod. "Nothing dramatic. Just, I'm here." Miss Haynes explained the situation to Lily in the gentle, slightly condescending tone that adults use with children in institutional settings. She was going to be asked to solve a math problem. It wasn't a test. It was just a conversation tool. She should take her time. Mrs. Calloway had written a problem on a piece of paper while Lily was being retrieved. She'd made it hard, genuinely hard. Harder than the original bonus question. Something she'd pulled from a resource she kept for the school's gifted program, a program Lily had never been referred to because her classroom performance hadn't suggested it was necessary. She slid the paper across the table. Lily sat down. She read the problem. She read it again. Then she picked up the pen they'd provided and began to work. The room was quiet. Daniel sat still with his hands on the table and looked at his daughter, and did not look at anyone else. He watched her face, which was doing the thing it did when she was working, slightly still, slightly inward, her eyes moving in small, steady increments across the paper. She was not fast. She was methodical. She wrote a line, considered it, wrote another. At one point she paused and wrote something in the margin, a quick notation, a shorthand, and then crossed it out and rewrote it differently. 11 minutes. She pushed the paper back across the table. Mrs. Calloway picked it up. She read it. She read it again. She turned it slightly, as if the angle might change what it said. She passed it to Miss Haynes, who read it and passed it back. "This is correct," Mrs. Calloway said. She sounded as though she was reading from a document she had not expected to find. "I know," Daniel said. The father in the polo shirt leaned forward. "Can I ask, where did she learn this?" "This method she used." "From me," Daniel said. "A pause. You taught her this?" "Yes," Miss Haynes said, carefully. "Mr. Mercer, what is it that you do professionally?" He looked at her for a moment. There were several ways to answer that question, and he chose the simplest one. "I work in technical support at a software firm downtown." Another pause, longer this time. "That's Miss Haynes started. Before that," Daniel said, "I spent 8 years at Thornfield University. I was faculty in the Department of Applied Mathematics, Research, and Instruction. I left when Lily was 2, after her mother passed away. I needed to be home." He paused. "I still teach her, though. We work through problems most evenings. Have since she was 5. The room was very quiet," he continued, not because he needed to, but because he had decided to finish the thought. "The method she used on the bonus question, the compression technique, I showed that to her about 6 months ago, when she ran into a similar structure in a workbook she was reading. She understood it the first time. She asked me why it worked. Not just that it worked. We spent about 40 minutes on it." He looked at Mrs. Calloway. She called it folding it. I thought that was a good name for it. Lily was looking at the table. Something had shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, but the slow relaxation of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. The father in the polo shirt sat back in his chair. The woman in the fleece jacket looked at her hands. No one said anything for a long moment. Daniel didn't fill the silence. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was often doing necessary work, that the impulse to fill it was usually self-serving, and that the most powerful thing you could do in a room that had just been rearranged was let the rearrangement settle. Mrs. Calloway spoke first. "I owe Lily an apology." She said it directly, looking at the girl, not at Daniel. This was the right instinct, and he noted it. "I made an assumption," she continued, "and I handled this in a way that made it public when it should have stayed private. That wasn't fair to you." Lily looked up. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "It's okay." It wasn't the response of a child performing graciousness. It was the response of a child who had thought carefully about what she actually felt and reported it accurately. Daniel heard the difference. He wasn't sure anyone else in the room did. Miss Haynes cleared her throat. "Mr. Mercer, Daniel, I want to say on behalf of the school that we should have approached this differently. What should have been a conversation about supporting Lily's abilities became something adversarial, and that's a failure on our part." He nodded once. "I'd also like to discuss," she continued, "whether Lily would benefit from a different kind of academic support going forward. Given what you've described about her background and her abilities, she may be working well below her level in some of her current classes. And we can discuss that," Daniel said. "Not today, though." Of course, the father in the polo shirt, his name was Dennis Holt, Daniel learned later, said, "I want to apologize too. My daughter came home and told us about it, and I think we inserted ourselves into something we didn't fully understand." He paused. That wasn't right. Daniel looked at him. He was a man who seemed to mean what he was saying, which was something. "I appreciate that," he said. They wrapped up shortly after. Handshakes, the shuffle of chairs, Lily standing and putting her backpack on in that habitual way with both straps. "Mrs. Calloway walked them to the door and said, to Lily, quietly, "I'd like to give you a proper bonus problem every week, if you'd like. Something to work on." She said it as an offering, not an assignment. Lily considered this. "Okay," she said. "Yeah." Daniel held the door for his daughter, and they walked out together into the parking lot. The afternoon had gone gray, the air sharp with that early October cold that smelled like leaves and exhaust, and the beginning of something ending. He didn't say anything. They walked to the car and got in, and he started the engine and let it warm for a minute. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "I still froze." "I know. I knew the whole thing and I just—" She pressed her lips together. "I stood there, and I couldn't find it." He looked at her. "That happens. That happens to everyone. Not to you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I froze in front of a room of 200 people once. Graduate conference. I'd been working on the paper for 7 months, and I knew it better than I knew my own birthday. And I got up to the lectern, and I just stopped. About 30 seconds of silence. I could hear the ventilation system." She stared at him. "You never told me that. You never asked." She thought about this. "What happened?" Someone in the front row, a woman I didn't know, nodded at me. "Just once. Like, go ahead." He paused. So I went ahead. Lily looked back at the windshield. A small, involuntary smile moved across her face, and then subsided back into stillness. "Come on," he said, and pulled out of the parking lot. The school year continued. October became November, and November grew quiet and dark, and the maple on the corner of Birchwood Lane lost its leaves all at once one weekend. The way it did every year, slowly, and then completely. Some things changed, and some things stayed the same. Mrs. Calloway changed the way she gave back tests. She started writing her comments in pencil, on a separate slip of paper, and folding it so only the student could see it. A small procedural shift, easy to overlook. Daniel noticed it when Lily mentioned it offhandedly, and he thought, there it is. That's the thing that actually changes. Miss Haynes followed up on her offer. There were 2 meetings in November, one with Daniel alone, one with both of them together about what Lily's academic experience might look like going forward. Not a dramatic restructuring, not a sudden transfer, or a special program with a formal name. Just a conversation about what a child needed, conducted by people who were now paying attention. Lily would work with Mrs. Calloway on advanced material, 1 period a week. There was a possibility of something more formal in the spring, if Lily wanted it. Lily said she'd think about it. She did, for about a week. And then, said yes. Dennis Holt's daughter Claire came up to Lily in the hallway the Monday after Thanksgiving break. She didn't apologize. She was 11, and 11-year-olds rarely apologize directly. They approached the thing obliquely, but she said, slightly too loudly, as if rehearsed, "My dad said your dad is like a genius math professor or something." Lily looked at her. "He doesn't really call himself that. Is it true, though? He was faculty, Lily said. He left. Why? A beat. Because of me. Claire didn't have a response to that. She nodded in a way that meant she was processing it. And she walked away. That afternoon, she sat at the same end of the table as Lily at lunch. Not next to her. Just at the same end. It was something. The hallway thing faded, the way those things do slowly, unevenly, until one day you realize it's just a hallway again. Preston started quizzing Lily on math facts. She always knew the answers. He found this annoying and interesting in equal measure, which meant he kept coming back. The kitchen table. This was the center of their lives together in some way that neither of them would have been able to fully articulate. Not the living room, not the backyard, not the car, though all of those held their own significance. The kitchen table was where they did the work. It was maple, scarred along one edge from a move years ago. The surface still holding the ghost of a coffee ring from a mug someone had forgotten about. There was a lamp on the counter that threw a warm cone of light across it in the evenings. In the winter, when it got dark early, this lamp was on by 5 o'clock, and the window above the sink went black and turned the kitchen into a small bright world with everything else pressed up against the glass. Lily did her homework here. Daniel did his reports here, or whatever else came home from the office. They sat across from each other and worked in the particular silence of two people who have made their peace with shared space. The scratch of pencil, the occasional sigh, the sound of a page turning. Sometimes he taught her things. It was never formal. It was never scheduled. She'd come to him with a problem that interested her, something from a book, something from class, something she'd read about and not understood, and he'd look at it, and they'd talk through it, slowly, without urgency. He never told her the answer. He asked questions until she found it herself. And when she found it, he could see it in her face, the particular small illumination of a thing suddenly understood, and that was the only part of any of this that he'd ever called satisfying. In the weeks after the meeting at school, there was a Thursday evening in November where it snowed, the first snow of the year. The light early kind that sat on the windowsill and dissolved, and they were both at the table. Lily working on something for school, Daniel reading, and she looked up and said, "Do you miss it?" "Teaching." He put his book down. "Teaching," he said. "Or the university?" "Either." He considered this seriously, the way he considered most things. "I miss the problems," he said. "Not the institution. The problems." She looked at him. "You still have problems. I know. You teach me. I know that too." She seemed satisfied with this. She went back to her work. Outside, the snow was still coming down, soft and indifferent, covering the driveway and the street and the maple on the corner, making everything clean. He picked up his book again and didn't read it for a moment. Just sat there in the lamplight, with the window full of dark and snow, and his daughter's pencil moving steadily across the page. There was a thing he'd stopped worrying about somewhere in the past several weeks. He hadn't noticed when. Exactly. The worry had just receded. The ambient, low-level concern that the world would fail to see her, that the institutions built to serve children would serve her poorly, that the ordinary apparatus of a school day would grind against something in her that was not ordinary. That worry had not disappeared. It had just gotten quieter. She was 10 years old. She would freeze at blackboards again. Teachers would make assumptions again. The hallway thing would happen again in some form, because that was what hallways did, and because being different in ways that were not immediately legible was not something the world was particularly patient with. He knew this. He had no illusions about it, but she had a method now. Not a solution you couldn't give a child. A solution because the problems kept changing shape, but a method. A way of standing still in a room that was waiting for her to collapse. A way of staying legible to herself even when she was illegible to everyone else. He tried to give her this, not through speeches or lessons or careful parental programming, but through years of sitting across from her at this table and doing the work and being honest about what he knew and what he didn't, and staying put. Through the specific discipline of showing up every evening at 6:15, not with answers, but with attention. She'd learned it from watching him. He'd learned it, he was still learning it from her. He sat with his book for a while longer. The snow kept falling. The lamp kept its cone. He thought about the graduate conference, the lectern, the 30 seconds of silence that had felt like standing at the edge of something, and the woman in the front row who had looked at him and nodded. He had never found out her name. He had always intended to, after the session, and then the session had ended, and there was coffee and questions, and the intention had dissolved, but the nod had stayed. He wondered if Lily had nodded back at anyone this week, and they hadn't recognized it as a nod. If she had done something small for someone, held a door, answered a question in class, maintained her composure in a moment when maintaining it was hard, that had been what someone else needed, and no one had catalogued it, because it wasn't dramatic enough to catalog. He thought probably yes. He went to bed at 11. He left the lamp on. He always left the lamp on in the kitchen because Lily sometimes came down for water in the night, and he didn't want her to navigate the dark house alone. By December, the advanced work with Mrs. Calloway was a regular thing. A set of problems, every Friday, slipped into the pocket of Lily's folder. Harder each week. The second week she came home and told her father she'd had to work on one problem for 40 minutes before it opened up for her, and he'd said, "That's the right kind of problem." And she'd agreed and asked when dinner would be ready. It was ordinary, which was the whole point. At the December staff meeting, Miss Haynes raised the topic of how students were identified for enrichment programming. She did not name names. She said, "The referral system is not catching everyone." She said, "We need teachers to look harder for ability that doesn't announce itself." She passed around a one-page summary she'd typed up. It was not a dramatic overhaul. It was a one-page summary. But it was on the record now, which was something. Mrs. Calloway kept the pencil system for the rest of the year. The district spring math competition sent registration materials to Hargrove in February. Miss Haynes placed the forms on Mrs. Calloway's desk. Mrs. Calloway put them in Lily's folder on a Friday. Daniel read the forms that evening and put them on the table where Lily would see them. She saw them Saturday morning. She picked them up and read them through. She put them back down and ate her toast, all of it, including the crusts, something she'd only recently started doing, as if she'd decided one day that leaving them was wasteful, and adjusted accordingly. "I'd have to practice," she said. "You practice every week. More structured." She thought about it. "There'd be other kids who are also good." "There would be. That's actually better," she said. "For practicing," he looked at her. "Because then you have to actually be right," she said. "You can't coast if someone else knows as much as you. You have to actually." She searched for the word. "Show up." He nodded. She picked up the registration form. She read the entry blank that said, "Student signature" at the bottom. She read the event description again, carefully, the way she read everything. Not skimming, but following. She was a child who read the fine print. She signed it. He slid the envelope across the table. She put the form inside and sealed it by running her thumb along the adhesive strip slowly and carefully. Outside, Birchwood Lane was cold and quiet. The maples bare. The houses still carrying their Christmas lights even though Christmas was 3 weeks gone, the lazy January holdouts, the neighbors who'd get to it eventually, the string of orange lights on the Hartley house next door that had been up since October, and at this point seemed permanent. She put the envelope in her backpack, in the front pocket, the pocket where the note had been. Then she opened her book and started reading. He poured himself coffee. He sat back down. The lamp threw its cone across the table, and the window above the sink was black with early morning in winter. And the kitchen was warm and full of the particular silence that is also, if you know how to hear it, a kind of conversation. He didn't say anything about the competition. What he expected. What he thought she might achieve. She didn't ask for his prediction about how it would go. Didn't ask him to tell her what the problems would be like, or what the other students might know. Neither of them mentioned October, the test, the meeting, the conference room with its unmatched chairs, and the faint smell of hand sanitizer and the afternoon light coming through the half-open blinds. They didn't need to. The envelope sat in the front pocket of her backpack, with its sealed flap and her careful signature on the form inside. The lamp was on. The coffee was hot. A book was open on the table. and Lily Mercer was reading it with both elbows on the maple surface and her feet tucked up on the chair rungs, completely absorbed, occupying exactly the amount of space she needed and no more. Some things don't need to be announced to be true. Lily already knew what she was capable of. She'd known before the test. She knew with or without a folder full of competition forms, or a teacher who believed her, or a room full of people who owed her an apology. And Daniel Mercer, who had stood at his daughter's side in a conference room and said what needed to be said and not a word more, who came home each evening at 6:15 and sat down across from her at a maple table scarred along one edge, who had left a different life behind and rebuilt this one, quietly, with both hands, knew it too. He'd known it since the evening she'd looked up from a math problem, 9 years old, with the lamp throwing its light across her face, and said, "Oh, it's like folding it." He had laughed then, a real laugh, the kind that came without warning, and she had looked at him with mild surprise, and then looked pleased, the way she looked when she'd said something that landed exactly right. She hadn't known, in that moment, what she'd done. She'd just described the shape of a thing she'd understood, using the first word that fit. He had written it down later. He kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer, the kind with a cardboard cover, filled with things Lily had said over the years that he didn't want to lose. Observations, questions, the occasional verdict on something she'd tasted, or read, or thought about. A private record, not for her, not for anyone except himself. It's like folding it. He'd written it in the notebook that evening after she'd gone to bed, and closed the drawer, and gone back to his reading. He still had the notebook. It was still in the drawer. That was all the proof he'd ever needed. Some proofs are short. Some are 40 minutes of careful work at a kitchen table. Some are a child walking back to her seat in silence, folding a piece of paper into the smallest square it will go, and carrying it quietly until the right moment arrives. The right moment always arrives. You just have to know how to wait.